When we think of R&B legends, we picture powerhouse vocalists commanding stages, earning Grammy Awards, and creating the soundtracks to our lives. But behind the velvet voices and show-stopping performances, many of these icons were fighting silent battles with illnesses they kept carefully hidden from the world, sometimes refusing treatment, and other times continuing to work even as their bodies were failing. These weren't just health issues, they were deeply personal struggles with addiction, mental illness, and chronic diseases that these artists chose to keep private, often at great personal cost. Some feared it would damage their careers, others simply valued their privacy, and a few were in denial about the severity of their conditions until it was too late. Here are 12 heartbreaking stories about R&B stars who hid their diseases until death. Freddie Mercury's final statement. Freddie Mercury's gaunt appearance in the late 1980s had sparked intense speculation. But the Queen frontman consistently denied all rumors about his health, even as the disease ravaged his body. According to multiple sources, Mercury had known about his HIV-positive status possibly as early as 1987. But he kept the diagnosis completely secret from the public for years while continuing to perform and record. Only his closest circle knew the truth, and Mercury swore them to secrecy, terrified of how the public would react during an era when AIDS was heavily stigmatized and widely misunderstood. He continued working on music with Queen throughout his illness, determined to record as much as possible while he still had the strength. On November 23, 1991, Mercury finally released a statement confirming he had AIDS, saying he hoped his openness would help others understand the disease. He died just one day later at his home in London from bronchial pneumonia related to AIDS complications. He was only 45 years old. What makes Mercury's story particularly striking is the timing of his announcement, choosing to reveal his condition only when he was literally hours from death, maintaining his privacy and control over his narrative until the very last moment. His partner, Jim Hutton, later revealed that Mercury had spent his final days surrounded by loved ones, still maintaining his sense of humor and dignity even as his body failed. The music world was stunned by how quickly the announcement came before his death, and many wondered how he had managed to keep such a devastating illness hidden for so long while still producing some of Queen's most powerful work. Natalie Cole's 25-year secret. In 2008, during what should have been a routine physical examination, Natalie Cole received news that would upend her entire world. Her doctor discovered abnormal kidney function and ordered additional tests that revealed she had hepatitis C, a potentially deadly virus that attacks the liver and can remain dormant in the body for decades. The diagnosis traced back to her heroin use more than 25 years earlier, during a dark period in her mid-20s when she was arrested for drug possession in Toronto. Cole had believed those days were long behind her, having gotten clean and sober, becoming what she called a workout fanatic, and building a successful career that earned her multiple Grammy Awards and sold over 30 million records worldwide. The hepatitis C revelation was devastating because it meant a mistake from her youth was still quietly destroying her body all those years later. Her treatment required weekly injections of interferon, essentially a form of chemotherapy that came with brutal side effects, but doctors warned her that without treatment the virus would eventually destroy her liver completely. What Cole didn't anticipate was that the medication helping her liver was simultaneously destroying her kidneys. Just 4 months into her treatment, Cole's kidneys failed entirely, and she was forced to begin hemodialysis 3 times a week even as she continued touring to promote her new album. The grueling schedule of dialysis, performances, and managing her illness took an enormous toll, but Cole refused to let the public see her struggle. In May 2009, she received a kidney transplant from a deceased donor, and remarkably, The donor was a fan whose family specifically requested their loved one's kidney go to Cole if it was a match. The timing of the transplant was bittersweet, as Cole's sister Cookie lay in a coma in another hospital, and Cole's family had to practically force her to leave Cookie's bedside to receive the transplant that would save her life. Cookie died shortly after Cole's surgery, leaving Cole with what she described as intense survivor's guilt, wondering why she was given this gift of life while her sister and the donor's family had lost their loved ones. Following the transplant, doctors diagnosed Cole with idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension, a rare and progressive lung disease that causes the small blood vessels in the lungs to narrow and eventually leads to heart failure. For 6 years, Cole responded well to treatment and continued performing. But on December 31, 2015, she died from congestive heart failure brought on by the lung disease at age 65, leaving behind a legacy of incredible music and a cautionary tale about how past decisions can echo through decades. Bobby DeBarge's prison diagnosis. Bobby DeBarge was one of the most talented vocalists in R&B history, the lead singer of Switch, whose falsetto voice on hits like There'll Never Be and I Call Your Name helped define the sound of late 1970s soul music. Berry Gordy, the legendary founder of Motown Records, once called Bobby DeBarge the most talented artist he had ever signed, and producer Bernd Lichters said he had never heard anyone sound quite like Bobby, marveling at how effortlessly he sang. But beneath the incredible talent lay a tortured soul who had been addicted to heroin since he was introduced to the drug at age 15, using it as an escape from the alleged abuse he had suffered at the hands of his father. His addiction followed him throughout his career, and in 1988, Bobby was arrested in Grand Rapids, Michigan, as part of a drug trafficking ring that smuggled cocaine from California. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison, which should have been a wake-up call, but instead became something far worse. Before being sent to prison, Bobby confided to his family that he had contracted HIV, though the exact circumstances of how he became infected remain unclear to this day. Some family members believe he contracted the virus through intravenous drug use, while others have suggested he may have been exposed during his time in prison, possibly through sexual contact. His brother Chico later stated in interviews that he believed Bobby contracted AIDS while incarcerated, a statement that raised questions about whether Bobby had engaged in homosexual activity, especially given the allegations of childhood sexual abuse by his father. After his release from prison in 1993, Bobby discovered that his health had deteriorated significantly, and most of his family members had also become addicted to drugs or were facing their own legal problems. He felt depressed and hopeless, moving back to Grand Rapids to stay with his mother and some siblings while occasionally performing at local clubs and churches. His former bandmate Gregory Williams, who attended school with Bobby and performed alongside him in Switch, later described Bobby's final years as pure hell, saying Bobby was separated from his wife and kids and acting paranoid toward everybody because he knew his life was basically over. Bobby managed to complete one final album, It's Not Over, but he realized he was dying. In 1995, Bobby DeBarge became gravely ill, and his family placed him in a hospice in Grand Rapids, where he died from AIDS complications on August 16, 1995, at age 39, just 2 weeks after the release of his final album. The tragedy of Bobby's story is that widespread and effective treatment for HIV and AIDS complications would become available just a few years after his death, treatments that could have saved his life if only they had come sooner. Phyllis Hyman's Hidden Battle. Phyllis Hyman possessed one of the most distinctive voices in R&B history, a deep contralto that could convey joy, heartbreak, and everything in between with stunning emotional power. Standing 6 feet 1 inch tall, she cut an imposing figure on stage and was known for her theatrical performances and glamorous style. But behind the confident exterior, Hyman was fighting a battle with bipolar disorder and depression that she had been diagnosed with in the 1980s, about 10 years before her death. According to her friend and manager, Glenda Gracia, Phyllis had a very specific philosophy about life and death, believing that because it was her life and her body, she had the right to do with it as she chose, including ending it if the pain became too much to bear. Gracia stated that Phyllis was an advocate of suicide and had attempted to take her own life twice before she finally succeeded, and that this was not surprising to those who knew her well because Phyllis spoke openly about suicide as an option for those whose lives could not be managed successfully. Hyman's struggles were compounded by substance abuse issues, as she often self-medicated with alcohol and cocaine, rather than consistently taking the pharmaceutical medications prescribed for her bipolar disorder. She had entered drug rehabilitation facilities multiple times, but could never stay clean for long periods. In 1993, Hyman was dealt a devastating blow when both her mother and grandmother died within 28 days of one another, sending her into a deep spiral of grief. At the time of her death, according to reports, her weight had ballooned to over 300 pounds, and she was experiencing serious financial difficulties that added to her stress. She began working on what would become her final album, I Refuse to Be Lonely. During this emotionally difficult period, and according to producer Nick Martinelli, she was crying a lot during the recording sessions as she processed her mother's recent death. The album's songs were intensely personal, with Hyman telling collaborators exactly what she was thinking and feeling, and they would translate her thoughts into lyrics. On June 30th, 1995, just 6 days before her 46th birthday, Phyllis Hyman was scheduled to perform at the Apollo Theater in Harlem with the vocal group The Whispers. Her daughter checked on her at 1 p.m., and she was fine, talking normally and preparing for the show. But when her daughter checked again at 3 p.m., Hyman was unresponsive in her bedroom. She had overdosed on a mixture of sleeping pills and vodka. Her suicide note was brief and heartbreaking, reading in part, I'm tired. Those of you that I love know who you are. May God bless you." She was pronounced dead at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, and hours later, fans who had gathered at the Apollo Theater for her performance learned that she would never take that stage again. Liberace's closeted illness. Liberace was one of the most flamboyant performers in entertainment history, known for his elaborate costumes, candelabras on his piano, and over-the-top stage presence that made him one of the highest-paid entertainers in the world during his peak years. But throughout his entire life, Liberace was a closeted homosexual, maintaining the facade of being available to the ladies even as he lived with male partners behind closed doors. In August 1985, Liberace was secretly diagnosed with AIDS, a diagnosis that terrified him not just because of the disease itself, but because of what it would reveal about his sexuality in an era when being gay could destroy a career. He kept the diagnosis completely hidden from the public and continued performing despite suffering from heart disease and emphysema throughout the 1980s. According to people close to him, Liberace was determined to maintain his public image at all costs, refusing to let anyone know about his condition, even as his health visibly deteriorated. He continued performing until the fall of 1986, when his body could no longer handle the demands of his extravagant shows. On February 4, 1987, Liberace died at his home in Palm Springs, California, at age 67. The official cause of death was initially listed as cardiac arrest due to congestive heart failure brought on by subacute encephalopathy, but an autopsy later revealed he had died from an opportunistic infection called cytomegalovirus pneumonia, which was directly related to AIDS, Even in death, there were attempts to obscure the truth, but eventually the reality of his condition became public knowledge, making Liberace one of the first major celebrities whose death forced America to confront the AIDS crisis. Teena Marie's refusal to medicate. Teena Marie, known as the Ivory Queen of Soul, had one of the most distinctive voices in R&B, despite being a white woman in a predominantly black genre. She had earned respect and admiration for staying true to soul and R&B music throughout her career, and her loyalty to these genres made her beloved by fans and fellow musicians alike. But in 2004, Marie suffered a serious injury when a heavy picture frame fell and struck her on the head while she was sleeping in a hotel room. The accident caused her to begin experiencing seizures, a condition that would plague her for the rest of her life. In November 2010, Marie suffered a grand mal seizure, the most severe type of seizure that causes loss of consciousness and violent muscle contractions. The seizure was so intense that she fell and broke 2 of her ribs, leaving her badly shaken and frightened. According to sources close to the singer, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office found diazepam, an anti-seizure medication, at Marie's home, but friends revealed that she had stopped taking the medicine because of the side effects it caused. Instead, she had begun relying on herbal remedies, a decision that would prove fatal. Marie became so terrified of having another grand mal seizure that she insisted someone sleep in the same room with her at night, afraid she might have another episode while alone. On Saturday, December 25, 2010, someone did sleep in her room and left in the morning after Marie seemed fine. She was talking with her bodyguard around 11:30 a.m., appearing normal and in good spirits. Her daughter checked on her at 1 p.m., and she was fine. But when her daughter checked again at 3 p.m., Marie was unresponsive. She had apparently suffered another grand mal seizure during an afternoon nap, and this time no one was there to help her. She was found unconscious and died shortly after at age 54. The tragedy was that her death might have been prevented if she had continued taking her prescribed medication instead of switching to herbal remedies that couldn't control her seizures. Her publicist, Lynn Jeter, had spoken with Marie just the day before and said she sounded excited about performing in Atlanta that week, which was supposed to be her first show since the November seizure. Instead, fans learned that the Ivory Queen of Soul had died in her sleep from what medical examiners ruled as natural causes related to her seizure disorder. Ray Charles's decades of denial. Ray Charles is remembered as one of the greatest musicians in American history, a genius who pioneered soul music by blending gospel, blues, and R&B into something entirely new. But from age 16 until his mid-30s, Charles was addicted to heroin, a 17-year battle that he somehow managed to keep relatively hidden from the public, even as he was arrested multiple times for drug possession. He told police he had been using since he was a teenager, turning to drugs as a way to cope with the nightmares and visions that haunted him after witnessing his younger brother George drown in a washtub when Ray was just 5 years old. Charles started with marijuana, which club managers would give him to help soothe his performance anxieties, but it quickly escalated to heroin, and he became what addiction specialists call a working addict, someone who maintains employment and even thrives professionally while battling severe substance abuse. In 1965, after his third arrest for heroin possession in Los Angeles, Charles was given a choice: prison or rehab. He chose rehab at a Los Angeles facility and successfully completed treatment, emerging after 17 years of addiction to begin what he called his new sober life. What Charles didn't reveal publicly was that while he had kicked heroin, he had not kicked substances entirely. According to later reports, Charles found what he called a different buzz, drinking substantial amounts of gin and smoking marijuana regularly. Just like smack never got in the way of my working, Same goes for booze and reefer, he reportedly said, adding, "What I do with my own body is my own business." His body, however, could only withstand that kind of abuse for so long. In 2002, Charles was diagnosed with alcoholic liver disease and hepatitis C, the latter of which he had likely contracted decades earlier through intravenous drug use with shared needles. The hepatitis C virus had been silently attacking his liver for years, and combined with the damage from alcohol and drugs, his liver was failing. Charles famously said with ironic humor, "If I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself." On June 10, 2004, Ray Charles died at age 73 in his home in Beverly Hills from liver failure caused by acute hepatic disease and hepatitis C. The tragedy is that he survived his heroin addiction only to have the consequences of that addiction, combined with his continued substance use, ultimately kill him decades later. His death came right after he finished filming scenes for the biographical movie Ray, which would go on to win Jamie Foxx an Academy Award for his portrayal of the legendary musician. Minnie Riperton's private fight. Minnie Riperton had one of the most remarkable voices in music history, famous for her ability to sing in the whistle register and hit notes that seemed impossible for a human voice to reach. Her 1975 hit, "Lovin' You," showcased her incredible 5-octave range and became one of the most iconic love songs ever recorded. But in 1976, at the height of her career and at just 29 years old, Riperton was diagnosed with breast cancer. In an era when cancer diagnoses were often kept private and many people viewed the disease with fear and stigma, Riperton made the courageous decision to go public with her diagnosis, hoping to raise awareness about breast cancer and encourage other women to get regular checkups and mammograms. She underwent a radical mastectomy and continued to perform and record music throughout her treatment, becoming a spokesperson for the American Cancer Society and using her platform to educate women about the importance of early detection. What many people didn't know at the time was just how advanced her cancer had already become when it was discovered. Despite her public advocacy and positive attitude, the cancer had already spread beyond her breast, and the treatments available in the 1970s were far less effective than modern cancer therapies. Riperton continued working and performing for as long as her body would allow, determined to use whatever time she had left to make a difference. On July 12, 1979, Minnie Riperton died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles from cancer at age 31, leaving behind her husband Richard Rudolph and 2 young children, including daughter Maya Rudolph, who would grow up to become a successful actress and comedian. Riperton's decision to speak openly about her cancer was groundbreaking at a time when many celebrities kept such diagnoses secret, but what remained private until her death was just how little time doctors had actually given her and how much pain she had endured while continuing to perform and advocate for others. Luther Vandross's silent struggle. Luther Vandross spent his entire career singing the most beautiful love songs in R&B history, his velvet voice making him one of the genre's most celebrated performers. But behind the romantic ballads was a man battling health issues he rarely discussed publicly, chief among them a lifelong struggle with weight that fluctuated wildly throughout his adult life. Vandross was a self-described carb addict whose weight bounced between 190 and 340 pounds at least 14 separate times during his life, a pattern of yo-yo dieting that took a devastating toll on his body. When stress from his perfectionist tendencies became overwhelming, he would turn to massive amounts of food for comfort, reportedly consuming pizza, burgers, chicken, biscuits, rice, ham, and ice cream in a single sitting. Then he would crash diet on high-protein regimens to lose the weight, only to gain it all back when the pressure mounted again. This constant fluctuation led to both diabetes and high blood pressure, conditions that Vandross kept largely private even as they threatened his health. On April 16th, 2003, just after completing the final vocals for his album Dance with My Father, Vandross suffered a severe stroke at his home in New York City that left him in a coma for nearly 2 months. During that time, he also had to fight meningitis and pneumonia that required a tracheotomy. When Vandross emerged from the coma, the stroke had left him confined to a wheelchair with severely slurred speech and damaged singing ability, robbing him of the one thing that had defined his life. His assistant, Max Sadek, later said he was stunned when doctors told him Luther's stroke could have been prevented if his diabetes and high blood pressure had been properly managed. And Sadek hadn't known about the link between mismanaged diabetes and stroke until that devastating moment. Vandross made only 2 public appearances after the stroke, at the 2004 Grammy Awards via videotape to accept the Song of the Year award for Dance with My Father, and on the Oprah Winfrey Show in May 2004, where he thanked fans and tried to raise awareness about diabetes and the importance of managing the disease. On July 1, 2005, Luther Vandross died of a heart attack at JFK Medical Center in Edison, New Jersey, at age 54. He never fully recovered from the stroke that had stolen his ability to sing, and the world lost one of the greatest voices in R&B history to diseases that had been slowly destroying his body for years while he suffered largely in silence. Donny Hathaway's hidden mental illness. Donny Hathaway was a musical genius whose songs like This Christmas, The Ghetto, and his duets with Roberta Flack, including Where Is the Love and The Closer I Get to You, made him one of the most respected voices in soul music. But Hathaway had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a severe mental illness that he struggled with for years while trying to maintain his career. According to reports, Hathaway had been prescribed 14 different medications that he was supposed to take twice daily to manage his condition, but his wife said he would often stop taking them when he started feeling better, a common pattern among people with mental illness. On January 13, 1979, Hathaway was in the recording studio with Roberta Flack, working on what would be their second duets album. Producer James Mtume recalled that during one of the sessions, Hathaway began acting irrationally and displaying delusional behavior, clear symptoms of his paranoid schizophrenia breaking through. The session was ended early, and Hathaway left the studio and returned to his room at the Essex House Hotel on the 15th floor. Hours later, his body was found on the pavement below his window. Police investigation found that the glass had been neatly removed from the window, the door was locked from the inside, and there were no signs of struggle, leading investigators to rule it a suicide. However, Hathaway's family and friends have long disputed this conclusion, pointing to several pieces of evidence that suggested the death might have been accidental. Civil rights leader Jesse Jackson spoke at Hathaway's funeral and pointed out that no one bundles up in a coat and scarf just to jump out of a window, suggesting that Hathaway may have been leaning out the window as he had been known to do before, sometimes preaching and singing to people on the street below from his 17th floor Chicago apartment, a dangerous habit that had gotten him thrown out of other hotels. Earlier that same day, Hathaway had been cheerful in the studio with Flack, working on music he was excited about, which seemed inconsistent with someone planning suicide. The 33-year-old left behind a remarkable legacy of soul music, but the circumstances of his death remain one of music's most tragic mysteries, with questions lingering about whether his mental illness led him to take his own life or whether it was a tragic accident caused by behavior related to his schizophrenia. Marvin Gaye's final depression. Marvin Gaye's death on April 1, 1984, one day before his 45th birthday, shocked the world when it was revealed that the man who had given us What's Going On, Sexual Healing, and Let's Get It On had been shot to death by his own father in their Los Angeles home. What many people didn't realize at the time was that Gaye had been suffering from severe depression and cocaine addiction that had worsened significantly in the years leading up to his death, struggles he kept largely hidden from the public. According to multiple accounts, Gaye's depression had roots that went back to the death of Tammy Terrell in 1970. an event that devastated him and contributed to years of drug abuse and self-destructive behavior. By the early 1980s, Gaye was living with his parents while struggling with paranoid delusions brought on by heavy cocaine use, and his relationship with his father, Marvin Gaye Sr., had become increasingly toxic. On that fatal day, an argument erupted between father and son that turned physical, and when Gaye's mother, Alberta, tried to calm her son in his bedroom, Marvin Sr. retrieved a revolver and shot him 3 times in the chest. Some family members and close friends have suggested that Gaye, who had become increasingly despondent and paranoid from drug use, may have deliberately provoked his father, essentially using him to end his own life. Gaye had reportedly told people close to him that he didn't want to live anymore, and had even purchased the gun that killed him as a gift for his father months earlier, raising questions about whether this was a planned outcome. The senior Gaye pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter and received 6 years of probation, with judges citing his age and the fact that he had a brain tumor. What remained largely hidden until after his death was the extent of Marvin Gaye's mental health struggles and how his untreated depression, combined with heavy drug use, had left him feeling hopeless and ready to die, robbing the music world of one of its most innovative and influential artists at a time when he was attempting to rebuild his career after years of personal struggles. Sam Cooke's mysterious final night. Sam Cooke burst into the office of the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles on December 11, 1964, wearing nothing but a sports jacket and one shoe, demanding to know where a woman had gone. The motel manager, Bertha Franklin, claimed he attacked her, and she shot him 3 times in the chest in what was ruled justifiable homicide. But the official story has never sat right with Cooke's family, friends, and many who have studied the case. The woman who accompanied Cooke to the motel, 22-year-old Elisa Boyer, claimed he had tried to assault her, and she grabbed her clothes and ran, but she accidentally took most of his clothes too, supposedly explaining why he was nearly naked when confronting Franklin. What many people don't know is that there were signs Cooke may have been struggling with issues beyond what was visible to the public. Police found Cooke's blood alcohol level was 0.16, twice the legal limit for driving, and while he had been a social drinker, the amount of alcohol in his system that night suggested he may have been self-medicating or dealing with stress in unhealthy ways. The motel itself was located in a rundown area 15 miles from the nightclub where Cooke had been earlier that evening, and he would have passed numerous nicer establishments along the route, raising questions about why a wealthy celebrity like Cooke would choose such a place. At Cooke's funeral, singer Etta James reported that his injuries were far more severe than a shooting and beating with a broom could explain, stating his head was nearly separated from his shoulders and his hands were broken and crushed, injuries that have never been adequately explained. The entire case was closed within days, with minimal investigation into what actually happened before Cooke arrived at the motel office. Whether Cooke was dealing with depression, substance abuse, or other hidden struggles that contributed to him being in that situation that night remains unknown, but the circumstances suggest there was far more happening in the 33-year-old singer's life than the public ever knew, and those secrets died with him on that December night. James Brown's hidden pain. James Brown, the godfather of soul, was known for his incredible energy on stage, his innovative music that helped birth funk, and his larger-than-life persona that made him one of the most influential figures in R&B history. But what many people didn't know was that Brown reportedly struggled with substance abuse issues for much of his adult life, though he managed to keep the extent of his problems largely hidden from the public. According to various accounts, Brown had been addicted to PCP, also known as angel dust, at various points in his career, and this addiction reportedly contributed to erratic behavior and run-ins with law enforcement. In September 2006, Brown was hospitalized with pneumonia, and remained there for several weeks, but he insisted on being released so he could perform on Christmas night at B.B. King's Blues Club in New York. Against his doctor's advice, Brown checked himself out of the hospital and made the trip to New York, where he performed what would be his final concert. He appeared frail and weak during the performance, struggling through his set in a way that alarmed those who knew him well. On December 23, 2006, Brown was admitted to Emory Crawford Long Hospital in Atlanta with severe pneumonia. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and he died on Christmas Day, December 25, 2006, at age 73, from congestive heart failure resulting from complications of pneumonia. What emerged after his death were questions about the full extent of his health problems and whether substance abuse had weakened his body to the point where it couldn't fight off the infection. There were also reports of prostate cancer that Brown had allegedly been dealing with, but kept private, and some of his associates claimed he had been in more pain than he let on in his final months. The tragedy of Brown's death is that he might have survived if he had stayed in the hospital and followed doctor's orders instead of insisting on performing one last time, but his drive to entertain and his refusal to show weakness may have cost him his life, taking from the world one of its most dynamic and influential performers.